Hi, I'm Craig Johnson. Thanks for watching. Well, what is a literary lockdown? It's a series of short videos I've been puttering away on during the coronavirus quarantine. They dive into things I'm interested in. They're part performance, part literature, and part history. And since we're all in lockdown in our homes, I film them in different rooms of my house in South Minneapolis. Today's takes place in the attic. Normally, when there isn't a pandemic, I work as a director and actor at theaters around Minnesota. Yes, that's me as Oscar Wilde. I've been able to play him on stage in 3 different productions. That's a lot of hand acting, Craig. So, this is how we normally think of Oscar Wilde. The late Victorian dandy dressing flamboyantly and shocking everyone with witty epigrams. And even though he wrote poems, stories, essays, and the great novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, usually when we encounter Wilde, it's as the author of what I think of as the best comedy in the English language, The Importance of Being Earnest. I've done the show 6 times. These are a few of the productions I've been lucky enough to have directed. And I'm looking forward to the day when the theaters reopen and together we can all laugh at this hilarious masterpiece again. But to the task at hand. We all have different sides to our personalities, and Wilde was no exception. I'm interested in when and why we access those different parts of our identity. As I'll explain in the video, in 1897, Oscar Wilde wrote the first of 2 long letters to a British newspaper protesting the firing of one of the prison wardens, a man whose last name was Martin. And with this letter, he reveals a startlingly different side of Oscar Wilde. Hello, Craig Johnson here for another literary lockdown. It might seem really strange to be up here in my attic, especially since I want to talk a little bit again about Oscar Wilde. After serving 2 years at hard labor for the crime of gross indecency, Oscar Wilde was released in 1897 and he went abroad. He was a social pariah in England. No one wanted to hear from him, and they hardly did hear from him in those last couple of years before he died in Paris in 1900. Except there were 2 instances that are pretty startling, and I think they are wonderful pieces of writing and quite unlike anything else that Oscar Wilde ever wrote. They're 2 letters to the editor to the British newspaper, the Daily Chronicle. Now, one was in 1898, and it was on the general topic of prison reform. I mean, imagine how unsettling that would be to open your paper and there's Oscar Wilde talking about prison reform. But the year beforehand, shortly after he had been released, he wrote another letter, which I'd like to share a part of with you, also on prison reform, but this specifically dealing with children in prison. This also was to the Daily Chronicle, and both of these letters had an impact on general prison reform in England. So it was a wonderful contribution that Oscar Wilde was able to make in those last years of his life. So this is a letter to the editor of the Daily Chronicle, and it is dated Friday, May 28th, 1897. Sir, I learn with great regret that Warder Martin of Reading Prison has been dismissed by the prison commissioners for having given some sweet biscuits to a little hungry child. I saw the 3 children myself on Monday preceding my release. They had just been convicted and were standing in a row in the central hall in their prison dress. They were quite small, the youngest, the one to whom the warder gave the biscuits, being a tiny little chap, for whom they had evidently been unable to find clothes small enough to fit. I had, of course, seen many children in prison during the 2 years during which I was myself confined. Wandsworth Prison, especially, contained always a large number of children, but the child I saw was tinier than any of them. I need not say how utterly distressed I was to see these children at Reading, for I knew the treatment in store for them. The cruelty that is practiced on children in English prisons is incredible.
except to those who have witnessed it and are aware of the brutality of the system. The present treatment of children is primarily from people not understanding the peculiar psychology of a child's nature. A child cannot understand a punishment inflicted by society. It cannot realize what society is. With grown-up people, it is, of course, the reverse. Those of us who are either in prison or have been sent there can understand what that collective force called society means, and whatever we may think of its methods or claims, we can force ourselves to accept it. The child, however, being taken away by people whom it has never seen and of whom it knows nothing, and finding itself in a lonely and unfamiliar cell, and ordered about and punished by representatives of a system that it cannot understand, becomes an immediate prey to the most prominent emotion produced by modern prisons: terror. The terror of a child in prison is quite limitless. I remember once in Reading, as I was going out to exercise, seeing in the dimly lit cell right opposite my own a small boy. Two warders, not unkindly men, were talking to him. The child's face was like a white wedge of sheer terror, the terror of a hunted animal. The next morning I heard him at breakfast time crying and calling to be let out. His cry was for his parents. Yet he was not even convicted of whatever little offence he had been charged with. He was simply on remand. Justices and magistrates, an entirely ignorant class as a rule, often remand children for a week and then remit whatever sentence they are entitled to pass. They call this not sending a child to prison. It is, of course, a stupid view. To a little child, whether he is in prison on remand or after conviction, is not a subtlety of social position he can comprehend. To him, the horrible thing is to be there at all. In the eyes of humanity, it should be a horrible thing for him to be there at all. Every child is confined to its cell for 23 hours out of the 24. This is the appalling thing. To shut up a child in a dimly lit cell for 23 hours is the cruelty of stupidity. If an individual parent or guardian did this to a child, they would be severely punished. But our own actual society does worse. The system prohibits the warders from rendering the child any assistance. Should they do so, as Warder Martin did, they are dismissed. The second thing from which a child suffers in prison is hunger. The food consists of a piece of badly baked prison bread and a tin of water for breakfast at 7:30. At 12 o'clock, a dinner composed of coarse Indian meal, stirabout, and at 5:30, a piece of dry bread and a tin of water. This diet, in the case of a strong grown man, is always productive of illness of some kind, chiefly, of course, of diarrhea. In the case of a child, the child is incapable of eating the food at all. Anyone who knows anything about children knows how easily a child's digestion is upset by a fit of crying and mental distress. A child who has been crying all day long and perhaps half the night and is preyed upon by terror simply cannot eat food of this horrible kind. The case of the little child to whom Warder Martin gave the biscuits. The child was crying with hunger on Tuesday morning and utterly unable to eat the bread and water for breakfast. Martin went out and bought the few sweet biscuits for the child rather than see it starving. It was a beautiful action, and was so recognized by the child, who, utterly unconscious of the regulation of the prison board, told one of the senior warders how kind this junior warder had been to him. The result was, of course, a report and dismissal. A great deal has been talked and written lately about the contaminating influence of prisons on young children. What is said is quite true. A child is utterly contaminated by prison life. But the contaminating influence is not that of the prisoners. It is that of the whole prison system, of the governor, the chaplain, the warders, the lonely cell, the isolation, the revolting food, the the rules of the prison commissioners, the mode of discipline, as it is termed, of the life. It is not the prisoners who need reformation. It is the prisons. Of course, no child under 14 years of age should be sent to prison at all. It is an absurdity, and like many absurdities, of absolutely tragic results. If, however, they are to be sent to prison, during the daytime they should be in a schoolroom with a warder. At night they should sleep in a dormitory, with a night warder to look after them. They should be allowed exercise for at least 3 hours a day. The dark, badly ventilated, ill-smelling prison cells are dreadful for a child, dreadful indeed for anyone. A resolution of the House of Commons could settle the treatment of children in half an hour. I hope you will use your influence to have this done. The way that children are treated at present is really an outrage on humanity and common sense. It comes from stupidity. Your obedient servant, Oscar Wilde. Prisoner C33.